Hello everyone, and welcome to this NGV Triennial conversation with Erez Nevi Pana, who's joining us from Tel Aviv in Israel. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today on the land of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So as part of the NGV Triennial, we've commissioned a series of works from across the world which explore, in a broad way, designers working in collaboration with natural forces and systems. And I have the great pleasure today to be in conversation with Erez, who is joining us from Tel Aviv, who's presenting a new work in the Triennial, perhaps his most major work to date, which is called Crystalline, developed this year. And so Erez, welcome to Melbourne, virtually. It's very nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
Now, for me as a design curator, what I've found really curious about your work over many years is this commitment to a material, a research into a material, and that material for you is the material of salt. And I'm curious, and the audience will be as well. I mean, you can see this work behind us here, this monolithic work to some extent. But your interest in salt began many years ago. Can you talk us through what was it that originally drew you to this material and began this journey for you?
I would say the abundance of the material in this region. I was traveling back from the Netherlands to Israel, trying to search for something to write about for my thesis. And while traveling to the south of the country, just next to the Dead Sea, I saw this huge white mountain. You can imagine you cannot find any white mountains in the middle of the desert. And just by doing a little research, I've come to realize that there is 20 million tons of salt that are sinking to the bottom of the Dead Sea fifth pond. It's part of a factory that is using the water from the Dead Sea to extract valuable minerals. And the potash and bromine are being collected, but the NaCl, which is salt, is just being piling up. They started to extract this material and just left it over on the side in the middle of the desert and piling up into a big mountain. This struck me. I was thinking in a very, I would say, practical way. As a designer, we have a problem. There is a lot of material that nobody wants to use. It's not economical for the factories to clean it and start selling them. So it's just piling up and being left aside. So as a designer, I thought this is a great problem for me. A lot of material for free. Nobody wants it. And what can we do with this material? This was actually the starting point of this journey, I would say.
But it also connects with a broader kind of philosophy that you have as a designer to think about, I suppose, the much of the design that surrounds us today has some form of negative environmental impact, whether that's through the extraction of the material, the processing of those materials, manufacturing, or the end of life of the product. And you sort of approach your design practice in a much more sort of fundamentally holistic way, where you're thinking about the capacity of design to heal rather than to harm. So for you, can you just explain for the audience the environmental consequences of this salt? Because salt is a common material. It's a byproduct, of course, of this industrial process. But when 20 million tons are produced each year, what is the consequences of this salt being placed back into the environment?
Yeah, so basically up until now, it was piling up in the ponds. For the last 30 years, I can say. But since it's piling up in the ponds, there are they keep moving water from the natural sea to the area of the ponds every year. When you can imagine salt being piling up for 30 years, the ground is rising, and if you keep on extracting water and bringing them into the ponds, you can imagine that the level of water is rising. And in these areas, you have a lot of like maybe around 20 hotels that rise. So there is a lot of tourism and the economy of tourism in this area is something very valuable for the country and also for this region. It brings a lot of work for people around, and they could leave this problem aside for 30 years because the level of water wasn't so high. But since the last 7 years, it almost reached the level in which it will start to flow the hotels, then the government had to have the Dead Sea Works to start and extract and harvest the salt from the ponds. And they had no idea, and they still don't have any idea what can they do with this salt. So at the beginning, they thought they would extract it and just leave it in the desert. And now the idea is to extract the material and just throw it back into the natural sea, which is the North Basin of the Dead Sea. Just taking, like extracting the valuable minerals and materials from the water and just taking the trash, I would say, or the byproduct, and sending it back to its natural environment. But when you think about extracting more and more water and bringing more salt back, anyway, this area is unbalanced. So this is gonna make it even more unbalanced. And yes, my work is definitely based on. I look a lot at. I want to harmonize the environment around me, the studio, my house, the things that I eat, the things that I wear. I take consideration in almost every step that I take, and I guess this is also why I'm not producing a lot of design. You can see, you can look through my biography, and you don't see a lot of production. If I produce quite in a small amount, but with a target, like a very, very specific concept that speak about balance and harmony, and trying to connect myself and other designers to inspire them to look differently about the way we design and produce in a world that is globalized and with so many products around. I think we should start considering the amount of objects and that we produce and the materials that we use as designers, and last thing, the materials that we buy as consumers as well.
Indeed. And you don't, I mean, that's an important point, because within this exhibition, within the gallery, we're presenting your work with other projects. We're exploring this realm, I suppose, for the audience, that what is described as critical design practice. So design practice, designers who are working perhaps outside of the normal commercial conventions of a client gives you a brief, you design something, it gets manufactured and sold. And these are more experimental works. They're works that are meant to kind of open conversations or draw attention to something. I mean, the issue with salt is very interesting, because I think if we think of desalination plants and of returning salt as a byproduct of those plants into the ocean, I mean, salt is pollution in concentration. So it's, yes, it comes from the environment, but in concentration, it's pollution. So what you have done over, you talked about your thesis project, which was obviously something you developed while you were studying at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. You've then gone on to develop a series of techniques. And so this is somewhere between a production methodology, a craft system that you've developed, a set of tools you've designed, to work out how might this material be deployed or be adopted and as something that we might be able to manufacture with, we might be able to design with. And that's sort of the fundamental proposition here with Crystalline, isn't it? Is that salt could be a material that we use for manufacturing, for construction.
Yeah.
It's got amazing properties. Can you just talk us through, in terms of the different elements within the project, because of course we haven't even got to that yet. Why don't you describe the set of objects that are behind me, what begins, and then I'll introduce. What we begin with is a film, which is you flying a drone slowly over the fifth pond of the Dead Sea. This is the most saline pond in the Dead Sea. And then after that, beautiful aerial footage which shows the sort of density of salt within that environment, there is a ladder which emerges from that footage. So begin with the ladder and take us through the different elements, sort of, if you could just tell us the different methods that you've used to produce this work.
I was looking at this project as, first I wanted to expose my journey as a designer, also through an experience with one material, but using different kind of techniques. This was one point of view, and the other perspective on that was that I really wanted other designers or architects to look at the possibilities that this material can hold in itself, and using different kind of techniques and different scales of using the materials, or different practical, how can I say it correctly, practical uses for this. One of them, let's say if we start with the ladder, the idea behind the ladder was emerging from water, like starting the journey from water to land, and stepping up. Stepping up, it's something that I'm always curious from a physical way and also from a more mentally way, looking at life. So stepping up from water to land, meeting after the ladder this huge mass of salt, that very natural form, the boulder, extracted from the Dead Sea. It's like we can think about something that was layered for 30 years, maybe even more, than being extracted from this area. This piece was supposed to be thrown back to the natural sea. And as we spoke before about about a lot of salt being at the same place at one time, it is pollution. It's becoming something that I would say I wouldn't want to reach this point, to see 20 million tons of salt being trashed back to this to the North Basin of the Dead Sea. So looking at the boulder, extracting it, looking at it as a mass of material, and we know in architecture we use masses, something that needs a lot of weight maybe. So the first natural form, the first boulder, actually the all three boulders that are there, they were cut from one giant boulder that we divided into three pieces. First, we left with a very natural form, just the way that we collected it from the sea. Just after that, you can see the one that was we worked with a CNC machine, trying to shape it and give it a very fine and a very maybe even constructive look. That's something that the architects can relate more to it. And then we had the third piece, which was the leftover. I didn't think I'm going to use this. I thought I'm going to leave it outside. But as I'm always being so honest to the process, and all this project is speaking about leaving materials behind, and then I decided that I'm going to use also the little part, the last part that wasn't actually part of the original sketch. So we just cut it again and we used it as the third part and the third part of the boulder. Just after these two very natural techniques, first, crystallization process of the leather being submerged in the water of the Dead Sea and being crystallized through a few months over there, then extracting the boulders from the water, dividing them into three pieces. Then there is a series of blocks, I would say, that were made in my studio using salt and reaching the melting point of the salt and constructing blocks. In first, we tried very quite small dimensions, and little by little it emerged, and we reached this great scale of almost 50 centimeters high.
Yeah, these are quite large objects. What temperature does salt need to reach before it melts?
The melting point is around 800 degrees, and we need to reach almost 800 degrees, and then the process is quite quick. So the construction is each block takes like 30 minutes of production in total, from having the raw crystal into taking out the block from the mold itself. Yeah.
And so I suppose what's interesting here is you're sort of not only showing the kind of the capacity of the environment to create this material and to create the there's a decorative aspect to this work, which is informed or only possible through returning an object. So you've got an aluminium ladder, you drop it into the fifth pond, and it's kind of encrusted by the environment. So there's this sort of conversation about that collaborative act of trusting, you're putting the object within the environment, and the environment continues that. But also then these techniques that you have developed, and I suppose in terms of that architectural potential of this work, the blocks that are cast, I mean, I'd be very interested in understanding, so for you, if you thought about this project, I mean, 20 million tons, of course, this is, I see this as a chunk of a larger possibility. This is a speculation. How might you see that scaling? So have you thought about somewhere in Tel Aviv, a factory being set up, looking at this 20 million tons of material? It's free, and it creates a positive environmental outcome if somebody uses it. What do you think are the applications of this material? In your imagination, what would you like to see this turn into or evolve into, and how could we use salt really as a material for construction, if we think of a material in comparison like cement, which has a huge environmental impact, a huge carbon footprint, lots of toxic materials. I think that what you're proposing is that salt or other materials that are similar to this offer us an opportunity to sort of heal the environment while continuing to create built structures and other things, an infrastructure that we need to live.
On the topic of collaborating with nature, if you look at the last part of Crystalline, you can see I think this is the greatest achievement for me personally, because if we look on the way we started in this exhibition, I submerged an aluminum structure in the Dead Sea to be crystallized, and this is part of an industry. And when we look at the edge, the final part of this journey, we look at 100% pure salt block that was first being created in my studio, and then later on being submerged in the Dead Sea to crystallize and get this very beautiful layer of crystals on top of it. And if you ask me about the possibilities and why doing a project like this, I look at the Crystalline as almost a manual for architects, for governments, for interior designers to come and look at the possibilities of construction, of working with a material that it's not often that you see as salt blocks. And if you do see salt blocks, mainly it's being harvested from the ground. And here we speak about a totally different material. Like, it's not different, but like the extraction is from the water. It's salt, it's sea salt block. It's sea salt exhibition. I wouldn't say exhibition. It's a sea salt material that is being used on land. And this is something that I think it's very important for us to understand. We spoke about desalination plants. This project is in the context of the Dead Sea, but it can be everywhere where you see desalination plants. They have many countries around the world start to use more and more desalination plants, and as we said before they are trashing the salt back into the oceans. And why not to start seeing other architects, other designers look at this manual at Crystalline and maybe choosing one technique or choosing a specific volume or a specific block and using this in their design, in their constructions, in their architecture. So definitely I see this as a starting point. Personally, for me, this is the largest scale that I ever worked with, and the next step will be definitely constructing a real salt pavilion. I think this will be this is something I really want to achieve, and I think with this manual, looking at this and researching in depth the last 1 year, working mainly on Crystalline, I can say that I learned a lot. I had a lot of success and also some failures on the way, and now I'm ready, I think, to take it to the next level and start building and really constructing with salt the salt pavilion. Yeah.
Great. Look, that's a wonderful outcome, I suppose, if I think of the role of a curator, or the role of a museum to commission a designer to enable what is effectively a research-based practice to enable you to push to that next point. And also, in the meantime, to produce a sensational and beautiful and thought-provoking work. I'd like to ask you one last question before we finish up, which is, as someone who has trained as a designer, and that's obviously a trajectory that has evolved over, the last century, and it's tied to industry. You've chosen to sort of take a different path, looking at this sort of practice of critical design. Why for you is critical design an important motivation right now, and why should it be an important motivation for other design studios?
As I see it in this century, with so many technological advances around, like almost everyone can be a designer, and designers have to rethink their profession and understand that it's not only about beauty or function anymore. It's more about the statement. It's more about looking at our future and the environmental issues that we are facing right now. And we have a great role and a great part of polluting this earth, or even healing this earth, I think. If we look at the plastic, if the last 5 or 6 years, plastic was something that almost every other designer was trying to understand or to solve this idea, but we know we have the understanding that the plastic doesn't go away for hundreds of years. So where were we like 20 years ago, when this is exactly where design should be today, looking at the future and looking into materials and having the understanding of the objects we produce, the materials we use as designers, and the effect that they have on Earth. For me personally, it started I was always aware and I was always connected into the natural world. I grew up in a plant nursery, surrounded by natural materials, so my fascination started from there. But as a vegan, beside my diet, I collected other perspectives on the, as I said previously, on the things that I wear and also the things that I produce. And looking in depth into the materials that we use as designers, we acknowledge and we understand the power that we have to change this world and to help consumers to look at an object that is beautiful, functional, but also ethical. Okay, the way it was produced, ethics in the matter of looking at child labor, or at the same time animal abuse, or the abuse of our environment. So I think these issues that we're facing right now as a society, and we as designers have the ability to solve a lot of these problems, and I am striving and I'm hoping to see a great change in relation to the soul. This is quite, I wouldn't say it's a new material, but I would say it's a new approach to architecture and to design. We spoke a bit previously about cement and the effect that it has on the world. Not many speaks about the scarcity of sand around the world, and the idea of building blocks made from cement and taking sand from exotic places and ruining the environment over there. So why not to look at other materials, at other possibilities that we have? And I think salt is one great option, but definitely I encourage other designers, other architects to keep on looking and search for the next materials that will bring our planet to a more balanced and harmonized stage than the stage that we are in the stage that we are right now facing, especially with COVID-19 around us. I think this is also something that made a shift, I can say, in many people around me and many designers around me that started to look differently about their studio, about their workplace, the places they work at, or the materials that they use. So definitely, this is a great time to start their evolution.
Look, thank you so much, Erez. They're very poignant words and meaningful. And of course, sitting here talking to you remotely from Melbourne to Tel Aviv, I mean, we're only too conscious of the fact that this is a shared situation for the world today, and that you've worked to deliver with us this project through the last year, which has been a very challenging year for many people. And I suppose for me, the culmination of the work, it being here, it's sitting behind me, it's powerful, it's thought-provoking, but also it's your creation, and your hands were the last hands to touch these objects before they were received into our hands. And for us, that's a very special thing to be able to do. And I thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thinking, not only about salt, but about design and maybe life more broadly. And I hope that audiences that see this work understand it as an indication of huge potential for the future, for design and creativity to actually help us navigate to a place which is optimistic and inspiring, and that the conditions that we accept as normal today will be the conditions of the past at some point in the future. And that future can be much more inspirational than we think. But it takes creativity to get there. So thank you so much for your work.
I would love to say also thank you for this great journey and for provoking me, and also for the beautiful team that you have, and the museum for allowing such a great conceptual and important works that they commissioned. And I think this is quite rare in the world around us, and especially in this specific time where it's so hard and we are not sure what's about to happen. So I think it takes a lot of courage to do something like this. So I want to thank you and the team and the museum for allowing this project to emerge. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Erez.